Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back. Welcome to another edition of Speak Up. I'm very proud to introduce my next guests, Mr. Joe DeLeo, co-founder of the Weather Channel, and Art Horn, one of his students from what's
Linden State.
Linden State
In Vermont.
You just get on Route 91 and keep going, and when you're almost in Canada, you're there.
Heading up. Okay,
Yeah,
wonderful.
it's up there.
Well, I want to welcome you both to the show. And Joe,
Thank
you were
you,
on
Kevin.
before.
Yes.
And we've actually had a lot of positive comments on that last show, and we appreciate it. I just wanted to invite you back to talk about current events, maybe some other issues that we didn't, get completely off our chest on the last one. What a winter we're having, right? This is the first full day of spring, or second day?
Officially, yeah. I mean, to try to put a boundary on spring is, it's a convenient line, but it doesn't really mean much.
Right.
The weather does what it wants.
Yeah. I had posted, like I was saying off camera, that the YouTube video of our conversation. And just as part of the topic today, if you don't mind me saying, in my research, I've noticed that there are a ton of nonprofit climate change, global warming sites. I just kept going down the list, and they're all 501c3s. They're all nonprofits, which in my mind threw up a red flag. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is this just a big money thing, or what is this?
Oh boy, is it ever. Over $100 billion in the last decade has gone into the global warming hoax. And that goes to the company, the Greenpeace's and the Sierra Club, certainly, Wildlife
Fund, National Resources Defense Council,
sure.
all these environmental groups.
But all the universities are taking part, and they're benefiting from that.
And who is paying the bill?
We are.
We are.
This is the global warming hysteria is the biggest thing to happen to the atmospheric sciences in colleges and universities of all time by far. It's the Super Bowl, the World Series, the Masters, and the NBA championship all rolled into one. It has brought in more money to these schools than anything ever has in terms of what atmospheric sciences has generated in the past.
So basically, the colleges, the universities, the technical schools are all teaching this particular philosophy, this science, if you will, in order to get money.
Yes.
I don't know about the technical schools, but it is a big money maker for the schools. Yes, there's no question.
And so if a school says, we've really examined some of this data, and it's really not matching up. And I imagine there is some data out there that does not.
Oh, there's a lot of data that they're not looking at.
And why? Money's the issue, but is it that corrupt?
They're getting tens of millions of dollars in grants per year for this. They are all starting sustainability centers and special climate centers. They've purged the schools of professors and researchers that
you have to go along.
That didn't believe.
Yeah, you have to go along or else you're out.
They've hired environmental professors, and they head up now the departments. And I have an example here in Boston, Emerson College, where a fellow teaches a meteorology, weather, and climate course and has for a dozen years. And the department was taken over by an environmental scientist. He went to him and said, you can't teach climate anymore in your class because you teach it and talk about all these other factors besides greenhouse gases like the oceans and the sun. And the students are now asking me questions that I can't answer anymore. So you're forbidden, if you want to keep your job, talk about climate. You can only talk about weather.
And what is the difference? One is scientific, one is philosophical?
Well, the difference between climate and weather?
Yeah.
Well, weather is what happens every day.
Right.
Climate is the accumulation of weather over a much longer period of time. It's like a baseball player goes 3 for 4 one day. That's the weather. A 350 batting average for the whole season is climate.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, I know that in some states they're monitoring how much heat people use in their homes, and they're worried about travel time. And I mean, they're really micromanaging our very lives.
Yeah.
Is this how totalitarian?
It's.
I'm going here because I'm thinking
I think you're right.
it's very intrusive. I remember when the EPA came out. I believe it was Richard Nixon that actually, things were polluted. People were picking up trash. It was a good idea, it seemed, at the time.
Right.
But it's gotten way too powerful.
Yeah, the EPA did a lot of good work in the early days. And I know a lot of very competent people who worked with them. And there were a lot of problems that needed to be addressed. The air was filthy. We were dumping things in rivers. We're still dumping stuff in the oceans.
Lake Erie was dead.
Right.
Right. I mean, it caught fire. The famous it caught fire once. And it was things were a mess. There needed to be something. But now, as I guess it is with any government agency, they just seem to keep growing.
And feeding them.
And you need new projects and things to keep yourself relevant. And this whole global warming thing now is their main, what they're dining on. I mean, this is.
Now, you brought in an article from The Blaze.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people are aware of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was formed by the United Nations in the late 1980s to find the human impact on climate. Not to assess whether there was any, but to find what the degree of it is.
Okay.
And they have big meetings all over the world every year at taxpayers' expense. It's no expenses spared, and there's like thousands of people who go to these things, and they pick these at very exotic locations. And once every about 5 years, they have a big conference where they issue a big report. And in what's called the fourth assessment, which came out in 2007, they stated that virtually all of the warming that's occurred in the last 50 years is because of greenhouse gases and this kind of thing with a 95% confidence. Well, one of their big guys, one of their top people is this gentleman who, Ottmar Edenhofer, who gave an interview back in 2010 to a German TV station. Now, this gentleman is one of the lead authors in the fourth assessment report. So he's right there at the top. And in this interview, he basically told the interviewer what this is all about, what the IPCC, the United Nations climate change evaluators are thinking. First, he says this. He says, first of all, developed countries have basically expropriated the atmosphere of the world community. They've stolen it. But one must say clearly that we redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. Obviously, the owners of coal and oil will not be enthusiastic about this. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore. So what he's saying is that the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is trying to take money from the wealthy nations that have supposedly polluted the atmosphere with this very dangerous carbon dioxide, and then take money from them and then give it to whoever they think deserves to have it, poor countries. Now, the poor countries have, through the United Nations, come up with this thing called climate debt. I don't know if you ever heard about that.
I haven't, no.
Climate debt, it means that you, say some country in Africa says to the United States, you have ruined the future because you've created global warming with all your burning of fossil fuels. We can't use fossil fuels to develop our country anymore because we don't want to do the same thing that you're doing. So you owe us money. You should be paying us so we can use that money to develop our resources and make our lives better for our people, because we can't use fossil fuels to do that.
So in other words, they want us to surrender our sovereignty and,
Exactly.
our tax dollars
Well, the United
to
Nations.
subsidize their program.
Yes, well, that's what the United Nations is about. They're about one world government. I mean, they want to take over the world and run it the way they think that it should be run.
So are they after China too?
Well, China's basically told them to stick it where the sun don't shine.
Right. That was my feeling. I think.
Yeah, they've just said, look, we're going to do what we want to do. And there's another one. Who's the India has basically said the same thing, that they're not going to jeopardize their economic future by trying to eliminate fossil fuels. First of all, the whole idea of eliminating fossil fuels is ludicrous. Anybody who thinks that windmills and solar panels are going to replace those things anytime soon knows nothing about the issue.
I saw my first, I went into Boston, it was at Everett, Mass. And I saw my first huge big windmill in Everett, Mass. I haven't seen any around here. And I saw it going, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, that one little windmill is going to generate how much electricity and how much, I mean, it might be a good idea, it might not. The bottom line is, we have so much energy here right now.
Right. Well, I think wind and solar on a local small level can work in small doses, because that's all it's good for.
I wouldn't mind putting solar panels on my roof if I didn't have trees surrounding my house.
Right.
Because it would maybe heat enough water to...
And there are all kinds of creative ways, but I mean, to restrict, to go back to the Stone Ages, it doesn't seem to be.
No.
I've seen envelope houses. I don't know if you've ever heard of the envelope houses. It's basically a house within a house.
Right.
And the shell of the house generates heat on the outside, and it forces the air to the hot air. It was creative, but it's very expensive to operate that.
Right.
So I guess the worry I have is how pervasive is this in our policy here in America?
It's very pervasive. I mean, look at the new the person McCarthy, who's up for the new job at the head of the EPA. She knows nothing about climate change and nothing about carbon dioxide. But is going to be probably the new head of the EPA, and she is dead set against closing the coal companies, and then they'll go after natural gas. I mean, these people hate fossil fuels, and they are determined to shut it down.
They're very
without anything to replace it with.
Very frustrated by the natural gas, the fact that fracking has created a boom and made it available.
Right, and of course we had this recent movie out.
Which is total nonsense.
Yeah.
And then you get all these Hollywood celebrities who want to have everybody love them, and they want to prove to the world what wonderful people they are. And they go, like Yoko Ono now, and Paul McCartney, and all these others are protesting the fracking that's going on in the hydraulic fracturing is what it really is.
Oh, they got their millions.
In New York State. Yeah, right, but they've got their millions and millions of dollars, so they don't care, what the consequences are. The fact of the matter is that hydraulic fracturing is the answer to the future of prosperity in this country.
And drilling oil too. We have to.
Yeah.
I have to say, I was in a local grocery store the other day, and I was looking at the price of chicken. Okay, I know we're talking weather here today.
It's all related.
I was looking at the price of chicken. It was, instead of it being $3.69, it was $8 for the same package. Yeah. And I was going throughout the store, and I'm looking at faces because I do that.
Sure.
I'm a people watcher.
Yeah.
And I was in the egg aisle, and I turned to a lady, and I said, this is getting really painful. And she said, tell me about it. And I remember talking about the price of gas. There was a legislator who wants to raise the price of gas here in New Hampshire, 12 cents. I mean, come on, guys. Look, people are struggling. I mean, when you're looking at chicken or cat food, that's becoming a reality.
Right.
I hate to say
Especially for the people who are on fixed incomes,
exactly.
and who have no other options.
Right. So, another thing that we touched on this whole global warming issue is, I just heard on the radio not too long ago that the sun is going to be in its hottest peak, or something to that effect, or in its hottest cycle.
No, opposite.
Opposite. Okay.
The sun is going into its 200-year minimum.
Okay. All right.
like the early 1800s.
But he might be talking about the peak of the latest sunspot cycle.
Oh, yes, it's peaking. There's an 11-year cycle.
Yes.
Okay, and they're not all the same. So some of them are flat and low, and some of them are very active.
It's
and
the number of sunspots
Right.
that we're talking about.
And the ones that are very active produce more warming. The ones that are flat, if they occur in succession, produce significant cooling of the planet. It did in the early 1800s. It did in the 1600s.
Right. Yeah, the solar activity. See, the IPCC, the United Nations group, only looks at the brightness of the sun. And from the solar minima, when there's very few sunspots, to the solar maximum, when there's a lot, the variation in the sun's brightness is 1/10 of 1%.
Right.
It's a very small number. But that's like looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. The sun is emitting all other kinds of radiation that they just ignore.
Right.
And one of the things they ignore is the solar wind.
Right.
The solar wind is a flow of highly charged atomic particles that come from the sun. Until the mid-1960s, the general scientific consensus was it couldn't exist. And then one guy theorized that it did, and then when we put satellites up to measure it, it was twice as strong as he thought.
And so that's like that's like a microwave set on low or high? Similar, I mean, as far as heating the Earth, if it's in its peak?
Well,
This is layman.
Yeah, what we think happens, and what a lot of research is going into this, is that the variability of the solar wind is very large between the solar min and the solar max, as opposed to the change in the brightness. But the IPCC ignores that.
Right.
And what it appears may be happening is that the variation in the solar wind affects the amount of cloudiness on Earth, and that affects the temperature. And what appears to happen is that when the solar wind is very strong, you have more sunshine, fewer clouds. And when the solar wind is weak, you get more cloudiness. Now, the difference is only 1%, 2%, or 3%, but that's enough to make a significant change in the Earth's temperature. When you have more clouds, the Earth is cooler. And if the sun does indeed go where it appears to be going, and that the sunspot cycles now are going to be very small. In fact, the American Astronomical Society last fall said that this cycle, sunspot 24, cycle 24, is going to be very weak, and it is. They said 25 may not even happen at all.
Right.
And if that is the case, then the solar wind is going to be much weaker, and you could see an increase in global cloudiness, and that would continue the trend of non-warming that we've seen since 1998.
You said non-warming.
No warming.
Right.
There's been 17 years without warming.
A statistically significant warming, right.
And even the head of the IPCC, Rajendra Pachauri, admitted that the Hadley Center, which is the source of the, provides the data to the IPCC, said there was no warming for 17 years, and he agreed that it was.
Now, the same guy, just a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, Pachauri, who was the head of the IPCC, who was a railroad engineer, by the way, said that the warming is taking place at a much greater rate than we ever thought. It's out of control. And now he's saying, not really. We know the warming stopped.
In the meantime, we've forked over how much money?
Well, I mean...
And that's really the crux of the matter. So a lie is being taught, and politics have weeded out good scientists out of the schools.
Right.
And when I posted your interview with me, I quoted Galileo, or something from Galileo. In his day, obviously, when he said the world was round, if you will, or we weren't the center of the universe, or whatever, he risked his life to go against the common powers.
Right, right.
And it seems as though that's what's going on today.
Yes.
You speak against what's globally understood to be fact.
Well, so far where I teach at a community college, in the climate section, they haven't bothered me. They have, maybe they don't know what I'm saying. I present the IPCC's opinion, and I show the students what the text says.
What's the general reaction? Because also in elementary schools, this whole global warming thing is being taught.
Yeah, most of the students are very interested. They've never heard any of this before. It's totally new. I was at a middle school, it must be 3 years ago, down in southern Connecticut, and I was, at the end of the weather program I was giving, I talked a little bit about climate change and global warming, and I showed them how the global warming had stopped, and that the polar bears were fine. They were, I said to the students, in the 1960s, the estimated worldwide population of polar bears was 5,000. Today, it's 25,000.
As a matter of fact, that was just on one of the major networks that, they didn't want to take them off the endangered list because that would, everybody would stop worrying about the global warming issue.
Right. Well, so one little lady in the class, student, went home and told her mother that this meteorologist came in and said there's nothing wrong with the polar bears, there's lots of them. And the mother threw a fit and called the school and complained. And then the school, of course, got all in a panic. And so when I went back, when I called them the next year to say, hey, well, I have the weather program, and they'd had me back every year for like 5 years. They said, well, no, we can't have you back. Why?
There's too many polar bears.
Because you've upset some people with your statements about climate change and polar bears. and I said, well, I just won't mention climate change anymore. And they said, yeah, all right, well, if you don't mention climate change or anything about the polar bears, then you can come back. So this is the kind of thing that's going on. Freedom of information, freedom of thought is being suppressed.
Right.
Another example is I gave a couple of talks up at Franklin Pierce College in an economics class on climate change. Yes. And this was up in near Jaffrey at that campus. And at the end of one of the talks, one of the students stood up and said, I'm mad, not at you, Mr. DeLeo, but I'm mad at the school because I took 2 courses in climate and I didn't hear anything about the sun, the oceans, and all these other things that you talked about.
So the true science.
Right.
Now,
Well, it's become so politicized.
Speaking of politicized, the president had something in the State of the Union address. You brought some material on that. You want to tap into that a little bit?
Well, he said, of course, that there's been more in the last 12 years, the warmest in history. 12 of the warmest years occurred in the last 15. He said that we're getting more extremes like Superstorm Sandy, more floods, more droughts like we saw last year. He didn't mention lack of snow, but I mean, he tried to make a case that the climate is more extreme today, and if we have to do something about it. So we need to go forward with my energy plans. And in actual fact, there's been no warming for 17 years. And the only reason why we rank high up is because they've fiddled with the data, the government agencies, to actually cool off the past.
Yeah, this is this is creative accounting. It's Enron all over again.
You've probably heard, your viewers have probably heard, that we've set more heat records last year than any year in history. Well, not actually. If you look at only stations that had history greater than 80 years, in other words, that were around at the time of the Dust Bowl,
right,
and the 40s and 50s that were very hot, it's hardly a blip up. The 1930s stands up like the Sears Tower.
Right.
And
they were much warmer.
It was much warmer back then. There's no trend in drought, no trend in floods. Sandy was not a superstorm.
Not even close.
Is anybody in Congress or anybody in the Senate listening to this?
Jim Imhoff is. Jim Imhoff from Oklahoma is a really outspoken the person about this whole wrong path we're going on, and this driving home of this this whole global warming fear story. He was the chair, wasn't he, of the House of the
EPW, Environment,
right,
Public Works.
Right, but now he's not. Right. Now we've got who? We've got, what was it, Barbara Boxer or some
buddy,
brain dead person? Yeah, it's.
So basically, it's disheartening to think that kids are going to school. They're mortgaging their life away.
Yes.
The colleges are being subsidized by both local and federal government, and all to promote a lie, which in turn extracts more money and sovereignty from the American citizens, right, because they care. Americans have a heart. They want to make sure that they're doing the right thing as a whole. I really do believe that.
Sure.
And yet, they've been fed a lie.
Right.
Yes.
And that's the only way to get them to surrender their sovereignty.
Right, and we're shipping so many billions and billions of dollars overseas every time we buy foreign oil. And if this government would just get out of the way and let our energy companies do what they do, we could kiss Saudi Arabia goodbye, we could kiss Venezuela goodbye.
But instead, what they do is they make them an enemy. They demonize these big corporations.
Right.
You know, there was a movie out. What was the name of it? Who's John Galt or something to that effect? But I heard the perfect definition of what fascism is. It's when a political party and a private industry both work together to weed out the competition so that they have an exclusive authority. That's what fascism is.
Right.
Correct? I'm really trying to, and if that's what's going on, you could see that with the government saying this bank will survive, this one won't. This car company will survive, this one won't. This energy company will survive, this one won't. Is that what's going on here?
Well, we've both heard Václav Klaus from Czech Republic president speak, and he is all over that. If you ever get a chance to listen to this guy, he's terrific.
Václav Klaus.
Václav Klaus. He grew up under communism, and then so he really knows what that is. And he has spoken at several of the climate change conferences we've been to, and he really can synthesize. And what he said was very interesting about fascism. He says it always reinvents itself in a new way that's hard to recognize. And it's now environmental fascism that's rising in the world. And the weapon of choice is climate change.
And green is the new red.
Yes.
That's right.
Right. It's environmental fascism.
It's really watermelon. It's green on the outside, red on the inside.
And and now some people might think, ooh, you're a bad person. You don't want to save the earth. We care about the earth. We live here.
Yes.
We also care about people. And what you must realize about the environmental groups is that the people are down here, the earth is here. The people are the last thing they care about. It's the polar bears, the wolves,
The rainforest.
the rainforest, some little thing that crawls through the sand, a spider, anything but
It's
a person.
turned into a religion.
Yeah, it almost is. And so whenever you see something from the World Wildlife Fund or the National Resources Defense Council or Greenpeace, you have to understand that they are very, very clever at presenting themselves as really caring, but what do they really care about? It's not people. It's anything but.
It's compliance. It's everybody has to follow a certain set of rules, and these rules are dictated from outside our country, basically.
I've been thinking about, in my meteorology classes, I've been thinking about making 1984 mandatory reading. Because if you read that over again, I recently reread the book, and if you read that, you can see it happening today.
Okay.
With what Orwell predicted in 1949, what he predicted would be happening. You know, people said, oh, 1984, it wasn't true because it didn't happen in 1984. Well, you can have the right idea about something, but it may not happen exactly when you think it's going to. It's happening today. You know, a lot of the forecasts that he made in that book are happening today, and I really recommend it to anybody who hasn't read it in a long time.
I remember in our last episode that we ended out our session with a clip from, I believe it was Eisenhower.
Right.
I was listening to the speech, and I'm thinking, how did he know?
He was like he time traveled.
How did he know? And how did Ronald Reagan know about the healthcare issue? There are clips out there talking about global or national healthcare. What?
Well,
if you can control the healthcare,
yeah,
you can control activity. If you can control activity, that is another form of enslaving the people.
Right.
For instance, if you pray to a God that you don't see, well, that's obviously a health issue. It can be.
If you don't believe in global warming, that's a mental health issue.
It could be
to
a
some
mental
people.
health issue. Or if you let your son target shoot with an AR-15. It just expands. I know we're talking about global, but what we're really talking about, in my opinion, it seems there's a lie out there. It's being funded by the taxpayers They're surrendering their sovereignty, and
Most of them don't even know it.
they don't know it.
A lot of them, if they had, we'd have a different president. Because Romney, I think, overall, got the message, got the right message, and would have allowed the energy companies to be energy companies instead of the government constantly trying to harass them, which is what they do now. But that's
What is it,
didn't happen.
68 or 69 regulations issued per day by this government?
The EPA.
Yeah,
The EPA is
largely.
out of control now. They do everything they can to harass
One
the
of the
energy
things,
companies.
one of the things I learned when I was a legislator is that there, in every form of government or every branch, there seems to be this. It was a revelation to me actually, that these departments can end up making rules that have the effect of law. So whether you're a judge, Rule 1.2, waiver of rules, and they can make their own rules up as they go, and they have the effect of law. The Department of Education, well, here's a rule. This will have the effect of law, and if you violate this rule, so I said that to say this, that these other departments, the EPA, they're not legislating,
No.
but they're making rules.
Right.
And these rules have fines.
Right.
And fines, obviously,
Right.
are a way to manipulate
Yeah.
the masses.
Yeah. Well, it's like an executive order. Just by what Obama said. If the Congress won't do anything about climate change, I will. That's a dictator.
You think?
Yeah. I mean,
I'm laughing. It's not funny.
no,
but
I know.
It's
and
one
he's
of
been
those things-
denying, you've heard him denying he's a dictator.
Right.
He's feeling the heat so much that people are calling him a dictator. Now he's out denying it.
Yeah, well, I think that the evidence is there. It's just a matter of whether you want to believe it or not.
Yeah.
And I think you made a statement earlier before we got on the air about
The Mark Twain quote, he said it's easier to fool people than to tell them they've been fooled.
and where are the other people that have the same message? Where are the other? I know you're not the only two on the planet.
They're out there. They're out there. But I worked in the media for television media for 25 years, doing the weather on TV. And one of the things I learned, one thing I learned is that as long as you call it promotion, it's not a lie. And the other things I learned were that they see the world differently. The media sees the world differently than most people do. They see the world from a television point of view, a television news point of view. And that point of view is everything that happens is a potential story that can be put on the news and help to generate audience. Because the most important thing in television is ratings. And the second most important thing is ratings. And the third most important thing is ratings.
You know, it's funny you say that right now.
Getting people to watch.
There's a lot of people that are on Twitter. There's this Kathy, I forgot her name, her last name, and she's asking for a boycott on Fox News just for a little while. And it has to do with Benghazi. We want, at least if they consider themselves a conservative outlet, then by all means put more pressure on the president and on Congress to report on the 30 individuals or 31 individuals that were left behind or that are being sequestered by this government.
The news media makes up their mind about what they want to do, and then they beat it to death. And they have decided, not as a group, but when you watch each individual newscast, say the nightly news on each individual network, it's amazing how the order of the stories is almost always the same, and the stories they cover are almost the same, and they do it independently. They don't talk to each other. But they think the same. And one of the things they've decided is that they're going to ride the global warming story because it makes them appear like they care. It makes them appear that they are involved in doing something good. And that's one of the most important things to any TV station, any radio station, or any media outlet is that they appear to be good and care, because that hopefully will translate to higher viewership or listenership.
But all these editors, all these journalists, all these people that work in the media were educated in a place that will endorse a lie. And that, to me, is troubling. The institution itself, if it will sell its soul for money and sell our freedoms, basically that's what they're doing. They're teaching a lie in one area. They're dropping the ball in other areas, because that, what to me, shows a pattern. And why should we have to subsidize that? I've been saying this to the GOP forever. You need to free up the education system.
Right.
You need to free it up, and you need to get involved with it.
And if you're, say, a reporter for a TV station, and you decide that, well, I'm not sure about this global warming thing, I think I may want to, see if there's something else to it. You better not go there if you want to keep your job. Lou Dobbs
Yeah,
at CNN
that's right.
spoke up against the polar bears being endangered, and gone.
Now he's on Fox.
Yeah, because
And for the record, I like Fox News, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
It's just we don't want them getting soft. It seems as people get comfortable with their ratings, people get comfortable with the status
point
quo.
was that Dobbs was questioning
Right.
the CNN, we got to save the world global warming thing, and immediately he was given the boot. So you're never going to get the truth from the media about global warming. Never. Nobody knows that this world stopped warming.
Right. Nobody will talk about that in the media. I attended the Society for Environmental Journalists annual meeting, maybe 8 years ago. And they actually have a handbook that tells them how to deal with skeptics, how to actually avoid us, how to cover this issue without having to look at our side of the story.
I've actually seen there were a few legislators that posted. I don't know how they found it, but there are a group of people that go to town meetings that have been trained on how to subvert a town meeting, how to take hold of the agenda of the
Right,
particular
the
meeting
dialogue.
and make it their own. They're trained to do this. So, somebody's doing it. I'm not a big conspiracy person.
No,
I think it is the
neither am I.
nature of humanity and the nature of our nature that it's either greed, power, lust for power, whatever. There's a lot of forces that are involved. And I think that people are so busy living their lives,
Sure.
their comfortable lives.
Right.
Who am I against this big colossal? How can I make a difference? I just need to make sure that I get my paycheck, my pension, and they don't realize that there are forces out there taking away their freedoms.
Exactly. It's about freedom. I've always believed that this whole global warming issue is really about the loss of freedom. It's being used as a tool, a weapon, to subvert the fundamental properties of this country. It sounds bizarre, but when you really look into it, when you look at what the United Nations is trying to do, when you familiarize yourself with Agenda 21 and all of these things, you really begin to see what is going on. Like Harry Truman said, and I can only paraphrase him, but he said, I feel sorry for the guy who reads the newspaper every day and thinks he knows what's going on in the world. You can't. You cannot rely on the news media to tell you what's really going on, because they have a formula about what they are going to put on the air to get people to watch. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you have to know is when you're watching that, you are getting a filtered opinion that is slanted in one direction.
All right. Who is it that said that they'll take us over without a shot?
Khrushchev, didn't he say? He said,
Was it Khrushchev?
We will bury you.
And how would he do that without a shot?
I think it was, he said our own greed would do us in. Capitalism would consume itself. Something to that effect.
It's interesting. We have a book in front of us. It's called The First Global Revolution.
That's a book published by the Club of Rome that started in the 1960s. They're an organization that they have a mission for one global government, and they organized the Rio Summit in 1992. It was attended by 178 different countries, and in this book, they talked about how in their meetings prior to that Rio conference, they were searching for an enemy to unite the countries of the world. And they didn't think democracy was up to the task. So they came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, would fit the bill. So they say that they invented the the threat of global warming to unite the world around this one common cause that would eventually lead to giving up our sovereignty and
One government,
one
world
government controlled by the UN.
Right. The last people you want in control.
Well, obviously, I knew that in high school.
Yeah.
My professor, or my teacher, Mervule, we had to read books called The Naked Communist, Masters of Deceit, Americanism versus Communism, and that was my high school training, and I'm very thankful for it, because it seems as though he was right on with his teaching. The first guy I ever voted for was Ronald Reagan, right out of high school.
Right.
But it seems as though there have been a lot of people, this whole idea of we won the Cold War. I got to thinking 2 steps forward, or 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, something to that effect. Maybe we won the Cold War, maybe we didn't. I'm not sure we did.
Maybe it was a draw, who knows?
Maybe it's still going on.
In a sense, I guess.
I think because there seems to be, I just learned about progressivism. I couldn't understand where we are today. I thought, now, is he a communist? No. Or is he a socialist? No. Is he a fascist? No. Now there's this whole new term called progressive.
Right.
And that's probably the most dangerous of them all. So anyway, I think it's important for our viewers to know that there are other opinions out there. There are other incredible scientists. Where can an individual look to find true data if it's not in the universities?
Well, the internet is full of
Websites.
great stuff. Anthony Watt's website is great. It's called What's Up With That. His name is W-A-T-T-S. That's his last name, Watts. And it's What's Up With That. If you Google that, that's a great website. Joe's site, icecap.us, is a great website.
And art is posted on that.
Now, you had mentioned that Dr. Forbes from the Weather Channel had seen one of your articles or some data at one point.
Dr. Forbes, I met at the Weather Channel before he was part of the Weather Channel many years ago, and but I don't recall that.
Okay, it was something in an email. I thought maybe there was something about an article that Dr. Forbes had, or that you forwarded.
Well, the Weather Channel is certainly active in selling global
They are
warming.
very active
they are
right now, unfortunately.
Deeply involved in selling that whole thing.
Well, they're owned by NBC,
Okay. So,
Universal, so
Comes
which-
from
in that family.
Now, on our previous show also, we talked about, weather forecast, and there's a
Right.
European one, and then there's the American weather forecast. Why are they so much better at forecasting weather than we are, it seems?
Well, they're not really. I mean, there
They're
are
models, if
The
you will.
models
these
are better.
mathematical models, but they're everywhere. I mean, the Japanese have them, the Russians have them, the French have them, the Canadians have them. Everybody has these weather models. This one particular one, the Euro model, does seem to be overall superior to what we do.
It's better about a day further into the future,
Yeah.
out 8 days, where our model skill drops at day 7.
Is it because of the satellites, or is
No,
it?
it's the models themselves. I mean, a model is something that a programmer builds, and it depends on what parameters you put into it to try to simulate what the real atmosphere is doing. That's what a model is. When you have a model train, it's a model of the big thing and the real thing. And so is a weather model. A weather model is a mathematical simulation of the real world. In Star Trek, they have the holodeck in the Next Generation, where you walk in and you can actually go into a different world. It's not that, but it's the beginning of that.
Interesting.
And in these models, in addition to the physics difference, they're fed data. And the better data that you put in, the better results you're going to get. They have a saying, garbage in, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
If you put bad data in, you're not going to get good results out. We like to think of it as, in the climate model world, as garbage in, dogma out.
Right. They're trying to basically rework these weather models into these climate models.
They
which
predict
then-
100 years out.
Then they can pretend to predict the climate 50 to 100 years in the future. And the problem with predicting anything is that, let's say the weather. When you start out predicting the weather, you have to know what the weather's doing now. You have to get a snapshot of what it's doing from the ground up to 100,000 feet all over the world. And inherently, when you do that, there's mistakes in your measurements. We do not measure the weather perfectly.
Right.
So from the get-go, you've got errors. Then the models themselves are only simulations of what the real weather does. They're approximations, and they make a lot of assumptions to try to get reasonable answers. So those are errors. So you have massive numbers of mistakes at the very beginning of the forecast, and those errors only grow with time.
Right.
So if you're going out 50 to 100 years, think about how big these errors become.
So, you know, one of the things that troubles me is, you know this, most people don't. How can the average person, if watching the show, say, you know what, there might be some truth to what you guys are saying. What do I do about it? What do we do about it?
Well, we have to vote the right people into office, for one thing. That's critical. You have to have people of the right mind running things. And this last election was evidence that maybe we don't have enough people to do that anymore.
And you have to educate the people that are in office.
Right.
Right.
Because they're not scientists.
No,
So
right.
I was in Washington 2 weeks ago, briefing congressmen and staffers, giving them a presentation that they debunked the story in the State of the Union about extreme weather. And
But it's hard to. That's a hard question to answer. What does a person do? It's a hard answer.
And the other answer is showing them they've got a climate models that now been running 15 years, and they've been abysmal. Everything that they said.
Much too long.
Who was it? I heard it on the Rush Limbaugh show maybe 20 years ago. But Ted Danson, maybe? Oh, the world was going to be burnt up, or we're going to be...
Oh, probably Ted Turner.
No, I thought it was Ted Danson.
Really? Oh, yeah. There's a lot of.
He was out on the global thing, and he said something to the effect, "Yeah, we're going to... oceans are going to be... Everything was just going to be calamitous." And it was 10 years later. Well, we haven't heard from Ted.
People should not listen to Tom Hanks. What's your name? Crow.
Cheryl
Crow.
Daryl Hannah and all
Daryl
those.
Hannah. Leonardo DiCaprio. Who's the Saturday Night Fever?
John Travolta.
John Travolta. All these people spout nothing but nonsense. As I say, the irrelevant ramblings of Hollywood celebrities should be ignored because they don't know anything.
And their climate models are failing. All of the main findings of the climate models have been shown to not be true after 15 years. And as Richard Feynman said, and I think we concluded that in our last show.
Right. Something to the effect of, no matter what your name is, no matter how smart you are,
how beautiful
no matter how beautiful your theory is, if it doesn't match real-world observations, the theory is wrong and should be abandoned. That's the scientific method.
Right.
Science is supposed to be self-correcting. Right. But it isn't. This whole global warming thing isn't science
It's
anymore.
taken on a political thing, just as in the day of
It's
the
an advocacy
keeps
thing.
morphing. It was global warming, became climate change, it became climate disruption, and now
Now it's
since they're
climate
not
extremes.
now it's climate extremes.
Right. I can almost remember when I was a kid thinking, we're going to be in another glacier.
Yes.
In the 60s. Am I wrong?
No, everybody
that was a cold period.
Oh my gosh.
After it was very warm in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, and then temperatures started going down again. We have been, there's ways to investigate what the temperatures of the past were through using what are called isotopes of oxygen from ice cores. And we haven't got time to go into the whole thing of how it works, but basically what it shows is that
those long tubes
there
of ice.
are 100-year oscillations of temperature. There are 1,000-year oscillations of temperature. There are hundreds of thousands of year oscillations in temperature that occur. And we are, with the temperature, according to the ice core data from Greenland, the temperature of the Earth has been rising now for over 200 years, as it has done in the past.
But it's been a lot higher in the past.
In the past. And 1,000 years ago, it was warmer than today. According to the ice core data from data, 1,000 years ago, it was warmer than today for 100 years. And it was warmer than today back in the Roman Empire.
So the bottom line is, question
Everything.
and everything. Question everything. Are there any final thoughts? We have our next guest coming on very shortly. So
it shouldn't be a Democrat-Republican issue. It should be a people issue. Because we're speaking against this whole dogma of global warming doesn't mean we are for polluting the world and destroying the forests and all that kind of thing. That's ridiculous. We are for sanity and proper judgment and level-headed thinking when this issue comes up.
Joe?
I agree. That's, we have to be sane about this issue as
Because it's very important.
it is
Because our
extremely
energy
important.
policy is being dictated by it.
And we're losing sovereignty every minute, every day.
And freedoms.
And freedoms. So, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Thanks for the
all right.
opportunity.
Thank you for watching Speak Up. If you want to get in touch with these gentlemen, how can we get in touch with you?
My email is skychaserman@cox.net. Skychaserman is all connected at cox.net.
Right.
Or Daleo, D-A-L-E-O, @weatherbell.com.
Right. And if you like the show, please contact me at P.O. Box 207, Nashua, New Hampshire, 03061. And until next week, thank you for watching Speak Up.
Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back.